G'day everyone. Today I've got Selby, the coach of Moreiras Magic and back-to-back AFL Fantasy Champion. G'day Selby.
G'day Chris, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. So to get into some questions. And today of course we'll be going through quite a number of AFL Fantasy questions. So what should have a greater impact on your final team structure, the rookies or the premiums and the mid prices that you like?
Yeah, well, rookies dictate your structure every year, and that's why we've seen some scrambling this year. And I think this year is going to be pretty unique because it appears that we're going to have not a heap of basement price, 190K rookies to pick from. So, and those who do get named might not have that scoring power. So the question will be, do we pay up a bit extra for these players we mentioned just before, like whether it's a Cherry, a Routh Smith, someone around that 300K mark or a bit less than 300K, which obviously dictates your structure because you can't then run those guys, then keep having the same number of Uber premiums you have in the past. So it's certainly the rookies dictate it. From there, I like prioritizing we say mid prices, but more those people who I think can be a top player in their position at a decent price. I'll prioritize those guys ahead of the premiums who I think are going to be the best scorers.
Okay, so it sounds like you're really prioritizing that sort of money-making side of things, where if you see great upside for much higher scoring, that's sort of really what you want to go for. Is that sort of roughly? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but whether it's the money-making in terms of their generation of the player or the money-making, the money you save by saving a bit of money with a discounted guy, you can then get a better player on the other end and get the scores as well. So if it all works out, and that all sounds terrific and it all works out well, you're laughing because you get the cash gen and the scoring. But as we've seen last year with whether it was a Tom Phillips, a Paddy Dow, Hayden Young, these mid-prices who to go early in the season, we took the punt on, you didn't get the scoring or the cash gen and you were left behind. So that's why they're always tricky when it comes to those mid prices, and you can only have a certain amount, I think.
Okay, oh, excellent. And what do you view as the minimum viable score for a rookie on the field and on the bench, respectively?
Bench, you almost just want the heartbeat. I'll be happy to get a 40 on the bench, 35, 40, and especially this year when we're going to be desperate, I think, just for that heartbeat. On field, there's something about the 50, which at least you look at a 50, you think, oh, well, it's a rookie. You're not going to feel too bad about it. So obviously you want to be shooting for 50s. If you're paying up a bit extra and the formula's there for the price projector and how much someone's going to earn depending on their starting price and what they're going to score. But if you're spending the 280K for a rookie, you're probably going to want to get a bit more than that 50 mark. And whether that's a 60 or 65, 70, you can't complain with that from your rookies. As I said, more often than not, these rookies are what's very similar team to team and who you're picking, and everyone by the season start get an idea of who those best rookies are going to be. So you can afford, if they do come out and score a 45, like if a Dacos scores 45 round one, no one's going to trade him out round two because everyone's going to be on board.
Yeah, no, excellent. And I might have to maybe take out some mid prices then, given what you're saying there. But talking about mid prices, so is there a certain number of points you feel a player should be underpriced? And if so, what is that sort of number or range in AFL fantasy?
Yeah, I haven't got a magic number on it. I know Super Coach, I've been working closely with Tommy, who's a very good super coach. And the rule there is the 35-point rule, because if they outperform by 35 points, they'll then make the 150K cash, which will then be enough, which is essentially what a trade's valued at. I more look at it in terms of what you think they're going to score compared to that top echelon in their position. So say if it's a defender and the D6 and the rolling 22 might be a 85 to 90 averaging player, you'd be more than happy from your mid-price. If they're scoring 80 to 85, you're not going to give away too many points. Whereas when it comes to the midfield, I think the M8 last year was like a 110 score and you're getting that 80 score. You're giving up a lot of points to those with a premium in that position. So it depends on position, but yeah, forward and defense, if you think they can score an 80 to 85, I'm more than happy keeping them in, because we all know with injuries and forced trades this year with COVID, you've got to be prepared to ride them up until the buys, these mid-prices. So even if you think they might outperform their price, but that might only be a 65, 70, you probably don't want to be rolling 65, 70s in your team at that time of year. So if you think they can score around then, and when it comes to the forward, the midfield, you're probably wanting someone to touch that 90 mark. And that's why Rowell's such a pivotal decision this year, because I think if he can do 90s, he's going to be well worth picking. And what he showed last night, it looked like he can do that. But is it sustainable, that pure inside role he's playing? And 0 marks last night, it's going to be hard for him to keep up a score around that 95 mark if he's not going to take his marks.
Excellent. And for the record, I am actually a Rowell fan and I do have him. Okay, so how many keepers should a coach aim to have in their starting squad? Again, is there a magic number or does it sort of differ from year to year, do you find?
Yeah, it differs from year to year, and there's no magic number for me anyway. I know, again, go back to Supercoach, which seems to be very structured, and Tommy likes to aim for 13 keepers, depending on the years now, looking maybe 12 this year, but it's very fixed how many keepers in his Supercoach. Fantasy, I like to take a punt on something. Might not end up being a keeper, but you hope that they are. So it's hard to put that number in it. Like, I think if you're starting with someone like a Caleb Sarong this year, you want them to be a keeper, but there's every chance he could average 95 and he's not the keeper. So you always try to think best case scenario and hope that all these mid prices you're going to have, like we saw with Petrarca in 2020, he was a mid price, ended up being a keeper. Devon Smith 2019. I think it was 2018, actually, when he had that breakout first year at the Bombers. You've got to hope that they're all going to, best case, become a keeper too. So, yeah, no fixed number on it.
Okay. And is there a place for mid-price midfielders in AFL Fantasy? And if so, is there a maximum viable number? Because I'm seeing a lot of mid-price midfielders that I think are going to go big this year.
Yeah, and that's the one which I believe it's more risk in the midfield because you are giving away a lot of points. Someone like Lipinski, who the decision might be taken out of our hands if he's not named. He obviously was injured in that Amy and still was hard picking him on the back of that injury. But if you thought that he could have scored 100, 105, then he definitely would have been a great selection. Rouse, the other popular mid-pricer, Caldwell as well coming in cheap. But like best case scenario, Caldwell might get that inside minutes and score a 95 and probably is viable. Like we mentioned before, you kind of want those 90s from those midfielders. But if he's going to split it 75% outside, whether it's half forward wing, 25% CBAs, it's going to be hard for him to get that score. And if he's only putting up 80s, although he's outperforming his price, I don't think it's worth the risk on that mid-price because you're giving away too many points. So, yeah, the midfielders where you got to be really bullish that someone, and it could well be, we mentioned Sarong before, he could come out and average 105 to 110 and then be a season-long keeper. You got him cheap and it's a one-way ticket to winning the comp. We saw last year Ben Keys, he was priced 80 at the start of the season, went 106. So it's certainly doable. So I wouldn't say definitely don't pick him because you don't want a mid-pricer in there. You've just got to be very confident that they're going to have that role and have the ability to go big.
Okay. What do you think about the viability of Preuss as an R2 this year? So if he can remain healthy, would he be a worthwhile selection? And what would he have to average for you to feel he's worth starting with?
Well, thankfully he's suspended. So he's not playing round one, which puts the decision off your hands because I was one and my winning years, I was set and forgetting the ruck. The year I came 33rd in 2020, I wasn't set and forgetting. That cost me a lot of trades and points throughout the season. So I'm an advocate for set and forget. The good coaches going around are advocates for set and forget. But there's something looking at some prior C teams and last year with Flynn after his big start last year, the top 100 were all people who had a Flynn R2. I was a believer in if Preuss was sole ruckman, then I would have, if I was playing, definitely had him as R2. And it would have been a big risk because we've seen what happens with Leon Cameron and the Giants and with Flynn and Briggs. Could come round 4, and if he's rested or dropped, what are you going to do? No viable R3. You're going to have to trade a premium in your midfield down to a rookie to get him back up. So it would have fraught with a lot of danger, and luckily that we're not going to have to make that decision because I was believing the hype of Preuss, and I think he can average 80 at AFL level, watching him in both VFL and his small stints he's had in the AFL.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he'll score, but obviously the durability is the big issue there. With mid prices and premiums, who you start with, if they start the season slowly, what are the things you look at to determine whether they should be retained or not? Because I find that's something I run into as a problem every year.
Yeah, so premiums you should never trade unless they're injured or suspended early in the year. Like if someone if you started with a Jack Steele price at 124 and he averages 102 the first 3 weeks, which he actually averaged last year the first couple of weeks, and then he went 130 the second half of the year. There's just as much chance he's going to turn it around and perform as the person you're trading in, and you pick that premium for a reason. It's more those players like a Lipinski, a Caldwell, those mid-prices who you've taken a punt on, who their role doesn't play out, whether it's a Rioli or even a Mcginerney's getting some buzz at the minute. So they're the ones who you can start with, and if they don't perform, then you want to jump off early. The runner-up of last year, Tommy Phillips, he jumped off him after round 3 because he just felt that he wasn't going to push his score high enough to be a top 6. So those mid-price players, you need to act quick on them because there's only going to be a couple of winners. And last year was Cumming and Hind were probably the 2 mid-prices who were successful, and there was a numerous amount who weren't successful. So move quick on them, but premiums, you've got to stay fat. And that's why we tap into your resource a bit, being the rookies, because those early trades should be fix-up trades of those mid-prices or breakout candidates. It shouldn't be fixing your rookies or fixing your premiums. But if you haven't nailed your rookies, then you're going to be spending those crucial rounds fixing your rookies.
Yeah, absolutely. With mid prices and premiums who you don't start with and have some cracking scores, what are some things to look at to determine whether they should be brought into your team or not?
Yeah, it's definitely roll. Sometimes you'll see someone score well, but it might be on the back of 4 goals or something which you don't think is going to be sustainable. More often than not, if you've covered it well enough in the pre-season, they should have been, if they are going to perform. It's rare to see someone come from absolutely no form lines to then go pop early. So if they're on your watch list during the pre-season and then they come out and perform early, then you've got to jump on. And some of my famous ones who helped me, whether it was a Clayton Oliver in 2017 or Tim Taranto 2018, their breakouts, I never started with them during the season, but I was tempted early round draft picks, big scores in juniors. You knew that they had the capability to go big. Come early rounds in the season, you saw that their CBAs were there. The role was real because sometimes in the preseason, there's a lot about experimentation, particularly the young kids, and giving them some minutes. So if you see it in the real stuff, yeah, CBAs and points per minute are big numbers, particularly also, what they did in the juniors.
Excellent. And what are your views on starting Jack Macrae as an M2 or M3, given his favourable early fixture? And on that point as well, with favourable early fixtures, to what extent does that come into your thinking?
Yeah, so there's 2 things with that favourable early fixture. One, whether it's an easy opponent, and that doesn't come into my thinking too much, particularly early in the season, maybe the last couple of weeks or captain selections. But with Macrae, it's more that he's got a lot of the early games. You have the ability to loophole his vice captain score. But I think the best practice will be trying to have 30 green dots early in the season. So all good and well, he's playing early, but you shouldn't be able to use the loophole because you should have all your rookies on your bench playing, in my opinion. So I wouldn't let that dictate it. Having said that, if the rookies aren't named or if you do have a red dot, then he's going to come in very handy because he's likely to be a top 3 scorer this year. Every chance he'll be the highest scorer in the comp. And if you get 2 looks at him for a captain score, it could potentially be a difference maker. So if you've got that red dot, then yeah, definitely he's attractive for lots of reasons, Jack Macrae.
Okay. And how do you think Touk Miller scoring will be impacted by the following? So you've got the return of Jarrod, Witts and Matt Rowell, respectively. And also you've got the new holding the ball rules, which to my eye test appear to result in less stoppages. So do these factors help or hurt his scoring this season?
I think looking at him over the preseason and back end of last year, I think he'll score in any environment against any opposition and any teammates. The way or how hard he works, it's been said multiple times on the TV that he's the hardest working player in the comp. Just watching him spread around the ground, he doesn't super rely on stoppages for his scoring. He bobs up for some marks and that as well, and gets contest to contest. So I think I've got him scoring similar to what he. It's very hard for players to back up a 120 season. So I don't have him exceeding what he scored last year by any means, but I can't see a reason why he's going to go back to the 100 days he was before last.
Okay. And given there are more 115 plus and 110 plus midfielders now than when you won AFL Fantasy, and that number seems to sort of grow each year. Do you think there should be any more incentives to start these more pricey types as sort of a blueprint, or is it better to more go that upside for growth strategy?
Yeah, no. So looking at my winning sides, I didn't start any Uber premiums, only one priced 110 plus. But you're right, back then there were less players producing those types of scores. A lot more points going around this day and age, and the recent years winners have started with that Uber premium of a 110 plus score. So I think with that, not just you want to get amongst the 110 plus, but with captain selections being so critical, it's definitely viable starting with one of these big fellas because you can lock in your captain each week. But I also, because it's worked for me in the past, I try to look for someone who I still think can outperform that price. And that could well be a top price player, whether it's a Jack Macrae who had the quiet end of last year. I think he was dealing with some soreness, or a Jack Steele who went 130 in the back half, quiet first half. Could he put it all together and go 125 for a full season? That's also outperforming the price. So I think you can actually get both if you look into it deep enough.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. And who would be your first selection in an AFL fantasy draft and why?
I like my ruckman because after the top, we talk about mids, defenders and forwards with a drop-off after the top 6 and 8. After the top 2 ruckman, there's a fair drop-off. I think Darcy's going to bridge that gap this year. Marshall's decent enough, and so is Riley O'Brien, looks back to his best. But I'd be a Grundy over a Steele and Touk, or even a Macrae Mitchell, who are going to be top scorers as well, because you look last year and Touk Miller was the 40th ranked midfielder, and then he became the first ranked midfielder. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to find a diamond like that who might push the top 8 going further down. But I think there's no chance someone in those later rounds are going to push the top 2 ruckman. So I'd be locking in a good ruckman, and that would be Grundy over Gawn.
Okay. Yeah, and I tend to agree as well with the durability factor playing in Grundy's favour. With a plan to structure my team with no rookie price players to start on my field in defence, who are some defenders you feel this year have upside for growth in value and are worth selecting in fantasy teams?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a common strategy with the lack of rookies, and those which we do have might have to, whether it's a Paddy McCartan or Gibkiss, whoever it is who's named, they might have to be an expensive bench option. Hopefully they're named and we can, bench options are named and we can sneak your McCartan on the field. But in terms of if you're looking for value, I'm a believer in Sicily. I know a lot of people have called on him after his poor showing on the weekend just gone, and the thought that he's actually very good playing as a defender as well as that rebounder. So he might have a bit more defensive duties than he was when he was a 95 plus scorer. But I like that he's had that good discount of 30% on his last season he's played. He's had a full preseason. He's one who I think won't score too far off your D6. And if you're getting him at D, I haven't got my guide in front of me, but if he's the 20th most expensive defender and you can get someone who might push that sort of mark, I think he's a good option.
Okay. And do you have one other, just to be a bit sneaky here, but do you have one other defender for me?
Yeah, well, the other popular one, and he's got a lot more popularity than Sicily on the back of his preseason form, but I think Hewett's role is real, that inside mid role. I was cautious on him when everyone else was hot on him when he was first flagged to play inside mid, because he's played inside mid at Swans before and had a career best season of 72. So at that price point, you're going to want to see someone scoring, I mentioned before, in defence, 85 plus. And I thought that might be out of reach, but he had 33 touches on the weekend and looked to do it pretty easy. So he's another one who I think will be, make up some cash and won't be too far off those top guys. So you can afford to sneak him in there.
Excellent. Yeah, I feel good having them both in my team since you've recommended that. So, so some players that I'd like sort of your thoughts on for AFL Fantasy in one word or less. So, Darcy Byrne-Jones.
No.
Justin McInerney.
What reasons why or not?
If you want to expand, you can. Up to you. So, if there's a strong reason,
he had potential to be a strong player at one point, but he's been an All-Australian and averaged in the 70s, 80s. So I don't think he's ever going to be a 90 guy, which you need.
Okay, that's fair. Justin McInerney.
McInerney's interesting. Strong finish to last year. Has that wing role. Good runner. It just wings don't seem to score too well at the SCG, and we haven't quite seen it yet. So he might be one you could not start with, and if he looks like he passes that eye test we mentioned with Torino and Oliver before, you could jump on then. But I can see why he's a popular name, particularly with not many rookie options available. He comes in cheaper and got tonned up in the Amy, which you can't scoff at that.
Yeah. No, I really liked him off the back of that. So George Hewett and James Sicily have mentioned. What about Nick Blakey?
No, he was good again on the weekend, but he's been thrown around, whether it's even used on ball for periods, forward, back. I don't think he's a scorer.
Okay. Noah Bolter.
Not for fantasy. No, I don't like key position players. I think he's a good footballer, but not for fantasy.
Yeah, it is one I'm actually considering for Supercoach, but yeah, for fantasy, I agree. Wayne Malira.
I like Malira on the hype, and I read and what I think he can produce. He just has never done it. Always injured. Doesn't appear to be in their best 22, or they're going to tread with him very carefully. So even if named round one, I wouldn't do it on the back of him not making their final Amy side.
Okay. Next one, Kadene Coleman.
Coleman, I love, and I love the more so Supercoach is what he does with the footy than fantasy. Doesn't seem to be an accumulator, but it's a shame he did his hamstring because I think he looked to be a very good player, Coleman. But yeah, fantasy, no.
Okay. And even when healthy, you don't believe for him. Okay.
I don't think for fantasy. So he had that halfback role at the back end of last year and in the finals, and he averaged 62, which isn't enough on that price. But I know his price at 41, but 20 points upside, that's not enough to him to get the 62, whereas in Supercoach land, he was getting 85s in the finals because he was so damaging, rebounding, hit his targets.
Okay. Yeah, fair call. What about Heath Chapman? This is one, I think he'll be one of the second-year breakout players personally, but what's your feel with him?
Yeah, love him as a player and as a Docker fan. He's got a bit of everything. He's got a great disposal, spoils well, intercepts well. The back six at Freo they've got a lot of distributors. So he's not going to get the kick-ins because it's going to go to either Ryan Wilson when playing, which I think he won't actually. Hayden Young. I think he's going to be very good and a great footballer, but it's hard to see him pushing that 85 mark, particularly as a second-year backman, without getting kicking duties. He's going to need a lot to go his way.
Okay, and if he went for say 80, that wouldn't quite be enough for you. For a rough
80 is probably enough if he can go 80, price at 49. But again, second year, yeah, it's a hard thing to do. It's average 80. And I'm with you. I think he's a jet and comes Supercoach land. Like he'll be getting intercept marks, spoils. He's priced much cheaper in Supercoach land as well. So I don't mind it there, but I'm no expert in Supercoach.
Yep, that's all right. I was really interested in that one. What about Lockie Neal? So now we're getting into underpriced mids, or as I perceive it anyway.
He seems to be a pretty much an automatic selection for a lot of coaches and me as well. He's we're going to remember he's going to get tagged a lot if he is up and running like he was in his good season. So he comes in price at 94. I think worst case he'll be a 104. So 10 points at that price point is definitely worthwhile, and ownership numbers are huge, so you can't really go wrong with starting with Neil.
Okay, excellent. What about Patrick Cripps?
Cripps, a bit biased because I've liked him for a while, and the word out there was that he was fit and firing. I'm now a bit cautious that because he was so good in the preseason and with no Walsh, I think teams are going to start looking at him a bit around stoppages, and that's where he gets the bulk of his points. So it's an interesting one. He's cheap, there's no question. Price at 82. He's done 109 in the past. I don't think he's a 109 anymore, but even if he goes the 101, which he went in 2019, that's going to be a worthwhile selection. His body, he's always good start of the season because, one, he plays Richmond, who are they don't really defend much in the midfield, and his body's fresh, whereas the way he plays, he gets so battered and bruised. It's just where you can keep that scoring up mid-season. So I'm a bit sitting on the fence with Cripps. I think there's a few others around that price who I think I'd rather.
Okay. Jai Caldwell.
He's a no for me because we talk about Cripps. At least we know he's done 109 in the past. We know he's going to be inside mid. He's going to get all the ball coming his way, particularly while Walsh is out. Whereas Caldwell, we could sit round one and he'll attend 15% CBAs and no Western fans going to be shocked. So I think the upside's there, and he's proven that he's good around those stoppages, but they bat so deep, the Bombers, that I'd be okay with leaving him out, despite the fact he could prove us wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Could he be a third mid for Essendon, do you believe? Like, obviously they've got Parrish and Merritt who are there 1 and 2, whichever order you want to put it, but who would have more CBAs, do you reckon, than Caldwell of interest?
I think, well, they love Stringer in there, and for a long time I thought Woosha was mad having Stringer in the CBAs, but he proved last year, and his CBAs second half of the year were huge, that he was one of the more damaging forward to centre mids in the comp. And Caldwell, when he had that great game round 1 last year, was before Parrish saw any CBAs, and it was before Stringer saw much at all. So I think those two, when Bombers were playing well, they were getting their fair share. Obviously, Merritt, you mentioned. Shield, looks like they want to get him back in there moving. He's the one who I thought might be playing a different role, whether it was a half back or half forward, and Caldwell might have found some opening there, but it looks like he's more preferred over Caldwell at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, and he's looking good as well, actually. Matt Rowell. Is he one to go with?
Yeah, we spoke about him a little bit before. I'd have no idea, to be honest with you. He ticks so many boxes, but he also crosses boxes being a pure inside mid, doesn't get enough outside easy possessions and marks, but his junior numbers are great. But then he's coming off these injuries and hasn't looked right for a while. Are they going to put him in cotton ball? It's going to be a bit of a make or break call on both Supercoach and Fantasy. I think I'd rather him in Supercoach because with those contested possessions, at least you get reward for effort there rather than just the 2 points for his contested handballs he's going to get in Fantasy. So I'm on the fence there, and I'm yet to make a big call on Rowell.
Okay. Oh, interesting to hear. What about Jarrod Pollock?
Pollock, I don't think he's going to play 22 games this year for Kangas. His wing attendance numbers were good, so he's back to playing that wing role, which is always a good sign for him because there's periods there, like he's averaged 90 3 years in a row, essentially 2018 to 2020. But as a mid only, I like my mids getting CBAs because if they're getting CBAs and those same amount of possessions, they're getting 105 to 110 because they're tackling and they're getting those opportunities for scoring, whereas outside mids rely on their team performing well. So he comes in a lot cheaper in Supercoach than he does in Fantasy, but yeah, Fantasy's certainly a no-go.
Okay. Next one, Finlay Macrae. Could he be a breakout player?
Well, you're probably better placed than me because you've seen what he did in juniors, and I've read your bio on him in our season guide last year that he compared very well with these other gun draftees, midfielders in his underage group, and he was forced to play forward line because was he the one who was playing with a Rowell Anderson?
Yeah. So he was asked to play a lot across half forward. Very clear.
Yeah. So who knows? I think his Amy, we would have wanted to see more from him to start with him. And second year breakouts in the past, haven't started with them, and you've jumped on early if the role's there. So I'd do the same, and I wouldn't be starting with Macrae.
Okay. Fair call. What about Tim English?
English I've been big on for a while. It's just hard with that ruck position because I don't think he's going to squeeze the gap. So do you put him in the forward line or do you get him for that flexibility? Round one versus Gawn's a scary proposition. So enough's there for me to say no. Watching him in the Amy, yes, he was great around the ground, got lots of the ball, but he still got pushed around pretty easily by not even that good of a ruckman. Who did they play in the Amy? They played
I'm just trying to
Brisbane,
think myself.
was it? Yeah, Darcy Ford, I think, pushed him around a bit.
Yeah, it was Brisbane, yeah.
Like his numbers from his debut season to his second, to his third, to his fourth, that trajectory, we all know ruckman take a little bit longer than most, and that was on par with your Gawn, Grundy, even Dean Cox back when he was a fantasy star. Those early years were similar numbers, and then all of them in their fifth year, had that big breakout where they asserted themselves. He went back, obviously played a bit of time up forward early in this season, but second half of last year, despite recruiting Steph Martin and Sweet getting some minutes in the ruck, he still attended 71% of the CBA, so he was around the ball and only averaged 82. So I was thinking the added points are going to come from more hit-outs and being stronger around the ground, but I didn't see enough of that at the Amy. But as I say that, I think, what have I ranked him at as a ruckman? I think I've got him pretty early in the piece on my draft rankings, behind Gawn, Grundy, Sean Darcy, Rowan Marshall, and I think he comes in after that. So I certainly rate him highly. But that ruck position, it's pretty fickle, and I think you want to have the best guys in there.
Yep. No, that's fair. And what about as a forward? Could he be viable as a forward, English?
Yeah, he is viable as a forward. It's just, would you rather him or would you rather your Butters, even a Taron Thomas? There's so many this year, Haney, Dusty Martin. There's so many other forward options who I rather my forward blueprint have forwards who play inside mid rather than play in the ruck.
Okay, that's fair. Rowan Marshall, who you mentioned as one of those that could go quite well this year.
Yeah, I like him. A lot of people like him, particularly when he's sole ruck, because he can score with the big boys when he is sole ruck. The risk with him, obviously, is who knows when Ryder's going to come back. He's been a bit injury prone, so they're going to keep that split pretty 50-50. And if they play that, was his name, Jack Hayes, is he going to spend some more time in the ruck too, like they did last year? They recruited Campbell as a backup ruck. So there's risks attached with him, and you want that ruck position to be comfortable holding them for potentially the full season. Having said that money you can make and the cash you can save on a Gawn, if that gets you the players you want elsewhere on the field, I'd be prepared to take that risk. I like Rowan Marshall.
Yeah, because he seems a bit underpriced, obviously, with the score last year. What about Riley O'Brien?
Riley, I don't like as much. He looked great on the weekend. He's done it before and had excuses last year with carrying some soreness and injury early in the year, and he finished the season pretty strong. So there's arguments to say back half of 2020, he scored as well as any other ruckman in the comp. Can he get back to that level? I don't think he can.
Okay, that's fair. Jarrod Witts.
Witts, normally your ACLs is a full 12-month recovery, which takes him to round 3 or 4. I was surprised how well he did look last night, but I dare say they're going to tread him pretty carefully, and you might see whether it's a rest or an in-game rest or low game time. It's too much risk in that ruck department because we spoke about the mid-prices elsewhere and how far you are from those top players in their position. If Gawn and Grundy are doing 110 pluses and you're going to get a 80 from Witts, although that 80 looks okay and it's well above what he's priced at, you're giving away a lot of points to the rest of the comp.
Okay. Yep. What about Sam Draper?
Draper's one for the future. I would have liked to see more scoring from him in the Amy and in the practice game. He has the game in terms of follow-up after hit-outs to be a big scorer, but we're just yet to see it. he puts together good quarters and good halves, but he can put together some shocking quarters and shocking halves. So maybe one for draft if you're punting rucks and hope for a breakout. But if you're starting him in classic, you're taking a big punt.
Okay, that's fair. Preuss we've sort of covered. So final thoughts on Preuss?
Preuss, he's not playing round one, so you can't start with him. But I think we're going to see him be the number one ruck at GWS back half of the year. We're all going to say, oh, just imagine if we had him round one, I was going to start with him and win the comp. But I think if he were to play round one, we would have seen rests, spent time forward, Flynn playing, dropped, and it would have been a pretty ugly start. So I think we've got away with one, despite me being pretty keen to go that angle.
Okay. Adam Treloar.
Treloar, I've always been cautious of his legs. Hamstrings, he seems to lose that spring he's had in the past and explosiveness. It showed a bit of that in the preseason, but then he looked like I saw him miss a few tackles on the weekend and he went for scans on the shoulder. So he comes with some question marks. After the first practice match, I think we all thought he's a lock. He's now less of a lock, but he should outperform that cheap price. It's just how do you prioritise them amongst the rest? Full detail on him and all these other players and the forwards, because we could, make arguments for and against a lot of these forwards, which we're probably going to go into, but the season guide's where you can get all my answers there.
Excellent. What about Cornelio?
Yeah, he's one of them too, similar boat, but I think I'm more bullish on him. He seems to look back to his full fitness. So, projections and all that are in that guide.
Excellent. Isaac Haney. So he obviously played a lot forward. What are you thinking about him at the moment?
Yeah, I was big on him, really big on Haney, and then was surprised to see him start forward and spend a lot of time forward. And the Amy obviously coincides with Mills returning and Papley out, and come round one, they're going to have Mills in the midfield and Papley out. So it's a tricky one. Obviously, he's shown he can score okay as a forward. So he's underpriced as it is. And if he gets any mid-time, it's a bonus. But I think with the amount of good options there are around that price point, like we mentioned a couple already, do you take that risk knowing that you could be giving away, could be 10 to 15 points to a Cornelio, a bit less to Butters, but then if he gets the mid-time, and that's why anyone's guess is as good as mine, if he does get the mid-time, then I think he's got the football game of high marks and also good tackles to be as good as any of them. So it's a tricky one, Haney.
Yep. Steele's side bottom.
I think his best days are over. He's going to play wing, and he's scored well on the wing in the past, but I think he was old, they're redeveloping. I think you're going to see a bit of a regression again from side bottom, despite him looking like he's priced very cheaply compared to his career best season.
Yeah, that's fair. Archie Perkins. So he's probably the other second-year breakout player that has really sort of wowed me during the preseason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he was great in the preseason, and he's one where you've watched more of him than I have because you've seen him in the juniors. I know you were bullish on him in the juniors as well. So there's every chance he could be that second-year breakout. We've seen in the past that they're the sort of picks which can help win the comps, but we've also seen that you don't need to start with them. I'm a Tom Powell for a second year, but again, I didn't see enough from Tom Powell in the preseason as I thought we were going to see. But out of those two, I'd be more Powell than Perkins. But yeah, Perkins, the future's bright for Essendon fans. I think he's going to be a good one.
Yeah. Nearing the end with these. Mitch McGovern. What are your thoughts?
He's more of a super coach, I think, because he gets the intercepts and he's priced cheaper. Fantasy, I wouldn't do it.
Okay. Will Brody.
Docker, I mentioned before we talked about Erasmus. Docker fan, I don't think he's going to be a regular best 22 for the 10 weeks you're going to need to have him in your side. But then it just goes, it's tough because he is cheap and he's performing well. And all talk from Justin Longmuir is that he is their best 22 and he's an inside mid. So there's definitely risks attached with Will Brody. But if named round one, and even better if named on the ball, it's it's going to be hard to pass up given that we're lacking some rookies. So he's only an extra 100,000 than other rookies. So I can see why you'd have him in your team.
Yep. Tristan Jerry, where's he at for you?
Yep, I like him again. Not many rookies. He's scored well in the past in VFL level, and I think Kangas should be ready to start looking at life after Goldie. So he's worth a punt.
Yep. Hugo Ralph-Smith.
He's a trickier one because the game style Richmond play, being not very high possession and chip mark, plus the fact that backline's got a few distributors as it is, whether it's a Baker, Short, Rioli. I think it's going to be tricky for him, but he is cheap, particularly in the Supercoach game with those cheap rookies. So depending with rookies are named, I'd rather, if a good rookie's named at a cheap price, I'd prefer that and save the cash there, particularly if he's not going to be on your field. But he hasn't done much wrong in the preseason with that role change.
Okay. Finn Mcginnis.
Finn Mcginnis, I don't know enough about. People are talking about him on Twitter. There's a lot of buzz about him, forward status, but I don't think I'd be doing that inflated price. I'd rather a rookie.
Yeah, he is a mid forward roughly. So I have to see if his best 22. I'm not sure his status there. Charlie Curnow.
No, for me, it's hard coming back from those injuries, and I don't like key position players. And at one point, he looked like he wasn't going to be a key position player. He's going to be more a roamer, but I think on return, he's now going to play as a key position. So no for me. Yeah,
I think you're right there. Okay, so we're finished with the fantasy section for some AFL questions. So just some tips from you. So Premiership, who have you got?
Seems easy, but I'm going to say Melbourne again. A lot of their players in their core you think will be even better again this year, being an Oliver, Petrarca. Gawn's not getting any shorter. So that was their core, and they all seem to buy in. So it's easy to say the last year's premiers, but I've got them winning it this year again.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Just their chemistry was just ridiculous last year, I felt. What about runner-up?
Runner-up, to go for more of a smoke, I think Giants will be good this year. They're looking healthier. They had so many complications last year with a Cornelio, a Kelly early when he was playing out of position, a Whitfield who had that off-season injury. So I think they'll be big improvers. If they kept Jeremy Cameron, they'd be right up there. But that's I think the one piece that they're missing. But if you want a smoky, them. But again, it's easier to say last year's runner-up. I think Bulldogs will be strong again.
Yeah, the Giants are certainly potent through the midfield, particularly with those ball winners. So can't sort of write them off. What about the big riser for the year? Who do you think will increase the most in ladder position?
Bias with Freo, and people were saying that they will too, but I think they're in that good sweet spot of games played for their key players. Fifey and Mundy are still good enough to perform, and Brayshaw, Sarong, Darcy should be hitting their peak. So I think they'll be really good. It's a shame they lost Chera because I know they got Erasmus for him, and who I think will be potentially as good a player going forward. But just the age demographic would have been good to have that one extra fourth or fifth year player in the midfield. But I think, I've got them pushing top four potentially if all things go well.
Yeah, I certainly love Fremantle's youth. So if you're not good this year, you will be in a few years, I reckon. What about the biggest fall? Who's going to drop the most?
I think West Coast is the obvious call, but the old teams seem not to be the flavour. So West Coast and then also Geelong, watching them last night, it's hard to see how they're going to have that spark. Danger was trying his hardest last night. Hawkins is getting on. They haven't really got the youth. So they're the ones who I was big on the premiership last year and had a bit of an investment on them, but I can see them dropping away.
Yeah, it's understandable. What about the wooden spoon? Who's going to come last?
Coming last this year, easy to say Gold Coast, isn't it? I think losing King's going to be tricky. They've got some good youth. They looked good last night, but
Their
They always
midfield
start
looks strong,
the season
actually.
well. Yeah. Yeah, because I've always been biased towards Collingwood, who people have finishing towards the bottom. I think they'll be better than they look. So, yeah, I'll stick with Gold Coast.
Okay. Yeah. Brownlow.
Or Adelaide, sorry. Adelaide's not great either. Brownlow, with Haney, like, he's the real smoky. That's hit or miss. If Haney gets the mid-time, he's a real smoky he plays that sort of style, which attracts votes. But Oliver is a safer bet. I think, will improve again and go another level.
Wow, there you go. That's a hot one there. And look, he could. It seems like with the Brownlow, it's always those high volume contested bowlers that seem to win it. What about the Coleman?
Coleman, after having them on the wooden spoons, they might not kick enough goals, but I think Jack Macrae with a full run at it should kick some goals and might be a low scoring Coleman like we've seen in the last few years. Like I've seen people tipping Bailey Fritsch and these sorts. So I think Jack Macrae might kick enough.
Yeah, he's looking good this preseason, so I think you could be right there. What about Rising Star?
Hard to go against Dacos. I think there's some good ones there and some good second-year players too who are eligible, but I think they'll look at the stats and the numbers, and despite Collingwood not winning a heap of games, if Nick Dacos can average 24 touches, which he probably can, it's going to be hard to take it off him.
Yeah, I think he might even go a touch above that, hard of a call as it is, but big call for the year.
Big call for the year, Pendlebury All-Australian playing on that halfback flank.
There you go. Well, great talking to you, Selby. I believe you have something to promote to our audience today.
Yeah, mentioned it throughout, but we obviously put out a season guide for AFL Fantasy. We've done it for the last 5 years, and this year we've expanded to Super Coach, all in the same package. So every player's profile, podcast with the best in the business, Tommy in Super Coach, and Xavier Ellis gives some good insight and humour as well on the back of that. So all our stats, data, commentary, articles, draft tools, price projectors, there's a lot which goes into it. So check that out. Moreiras Magic, MOREIRAS, magic.com.au, and you can find it all there.
Excellent. And I'll make sure to leave a link in the description below. And where can people find you on social?
Same again, at Moreiras Magic. Hard to say, pronounce, and spell, but MOREIRASMAGIC on Twitter's the main place you can find us.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us, Selby. And yeah, no doubt I'll talk to you again in the future. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the work you put into our season guide as well. The rookie profiles are great.
Excellent.
Cheers.